A millionaire accustomed to solitude entered his mansion earlier than usual, never imagining he would find his cook and his son sharing laughter in the kitchen. What began as a simple dinner transformed into revealed secrets, mistrust, tears, and finally, an unexpected chance for redemption and love. Prepare yourself, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. Some encounters happen at the exact moment when two souls need to save each other. There are houses that, even filled with people, seem empty. Luxury, sometimes, is just a golden frame around emptiness. It was like this in the Richardson mansion, where each expensive object, each artwork, each imported piece of furniture seemed to scream what was missing there. Human warmth. The footsteps echoed in the marble corridors as if crossing a mausoleum, not a home. And at the center of this silence was Alexander Richardson, a man who had learned to confuse success with happiness. Alexander was one of those men that time seemed to respect. At 52, he maintained his upright posture, penetrating gaze, and that aura of authority that intimidated at first sight. The gray hair at his temples only accentuated his natural elegance, as if even aging had to follow his rules. When he walked through the corridors of the company he had built from scratch, silence accompanied him, not out of respect, but out of fear. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Alexander smiled easily, when his deep voice filled rooms with warmth. But that was before losing Helen, the wife who balanced his obsession with work with a lightness he never fully understood. When she left, taken by a sudden aneurysm 4 years ago, something broke inside him. Discipline, which before was just a characteristic, became armor. And little Thomas, his only son, just 8 years old, was trapped in the middle of this whirlwind of absence. There, life followed a precise routine like a Swiss watch. Alexander left before sunrise and returned when Thomas was already sleeping. He left notes for his son, first handwritten, then dictated to his secretary, and finally replaced by cold, electronic messages. The boy was raised by a succession of efficient and discreet nannies who followed orders without question. He had everything money could buy, except what mattered most: his father. But fate sometimes likes to mess with organized cards, to challenge established patterns. And it was on an ordinary Thursday that it decided to interfere in Alexander Richardson's meticulously planned life. The day had begun like any other. Alexander woke at 5 in the morning, did his exercises in the private gym set up at home, had breakfast prepared by the personal chef, which he barely tasted while reading reports, and left in his armored car toward the office in the city's financial center. On the way, he took 3 international calls and mentally reviewed the agenda for the meeting with foreign investors. What he didn't expect was to receive in the middle of the afternoon news that the main meeting of the day, the one he had prepared for weeks, had been cancelled at the last minute. One of the Japanese investors had suffered a slight discomfort during the flight, and the committee decided to postpone the meeting until the next day. "Mr. Richardson, we can reorganize your schedule. There are other commitments that could be moved up," suggested his secretary, Martha, with that robotic efficiency he so appreciated. Alexander looked at his watch. It was only 4:30 in the afternoon. Normally, he would fill that space with more work, more reviews, more calls. But something strange happened. An inexplicable impulse, perhaps a distant echo of Helen's voice whispering in his ear. "No, I'm going home," he said, surprising himself and his secretary, who couldn't hide her astonishment. "Home, sir. Are you feeling well?" "Perfectly. Just tell Richard to prepare the car." On the way to the mansion, Alexander felt a strange restlessness. He hadn't gone home at that hour since Helen was alive. What would he do there? There were no meetings, no conferences, no urgent reports waiting for him in that empty space he called home. When the car stopped at the property entrance, The security guards exchanged confused looks. The boss never returned at that hour. Had something happened? Alexander ignored the looks and walked toward the main door, feeling almost like an intruder in his own house. It was upon opening the door that the first surprise hit him. It wasn't the usual silence that greeted him, but sounds of life. A crystalline, childish laugh echoed through the corridor, and there was music, not the classical music he occasionally heard in the office, but something simpler, more cheerful, and a smell. A smell that instantly transported him to his childhood, to his grandmother's kitchen. Beans cooking slowly, garlic browning in butter, the sweet aroma of caramelizing onions. Intrigued and somewhat suspicious, Alexander walked silently down the corridor toward the kitchen. The door was ajar, and he approached without making noise. What he saw through the crack made him stop, as if he had taken an invisible blow to the chest. Thomas, his son, that quiet and obedient child he barely saw, was sitting on the high Italian marble counter, with his legs swinging in the air, his eyes shining with excitement. He wore a small apron stained with flour and held a wooden spoon almost the size of his arm, and beside him, stirring something in a pan that sizzled cheerfully, was a woman he vaguely recognized as the new cook. She wasn't what one would expect in a mansion of that caliber. She didn't have the rigid and impersonal posture of the chefs who had passed through there before. She was a simple woman, in her early 30s, dark hair tied in a messy bun, tanned skin, and hands that seemed to tell stories of hard work. Emma. Yes, that was her name. She had been hired a few weeks ago, after the sudden departure of the previous chef. "And then you put the cumin like this, see?" she said, spreading the seasoning with a circular gesture. "My mother used to say that every seasoning has to be added with care, otherwise the food feels it." "The food feels it?" Thomas asked with wide eyes, in an animated tone that Alexander barely recognized. "Of course it does," Emma replied with conviction. "Food is like people, you know. It notices when you're in a hurry, when you're sad, when you're happy. That's why sometimes the same recipe turns out different." "Is that why Dad's food never has taste?" the boy asked, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Alexander felt something strange in his chest, an uncomfortable pressure. It was true. He never savored what he ate. Food was fuel, nothing more. "It's not exactly that," Emma replied gently. "Your father has many worries, many responsibilities. Sometimes grown-ups forget to taste the simple things." "Like beans?" Thomas asked, dipping, his finger in the pan and bringing it to his mouth, then making a funny face. "It has no salt," he exclaimed, laughing. "Of course it doesn't, you little impatient one. Salt only goes in at the end, otherwise the beans won't cook properly." They both laughed, like accomplices in a great adventure. And then Emma said something that pierced Alexander like an arrow. "You deserve more affection than you receive, you know. Every child deserves to feel loved, not just cared for." There was a moment of silence, and Alexander saw his son's smile diminish a little. The cook seemed to realize she had gone too far, because she quickly added, "Your father loves you very much, I'm sure. He's just trapped in that grown-up world of meetings and business. But one day he'll realize what he's missing." Alexander stepped back, feeling exposed, as if that simple woman, whom he barely knew, had managed to see through all his layers of protection. Who was she to judge his relationship with his son? He gave Thomas everything a child could want. The best education, the best toys, the best opportunities. But while he thought this, another voice inside him, perhaps Helen's voice, whispered, "But you don't give him what he really needs." Without realizing it, Alexander took another step back, and his Italian shoe hit a sideboard, making a dry noise. Immediately, the conversation in the kitchen ceased. He could have walked away, pretended he wasn't there. But something pushed him forward. He pushed the door and entered. Emma's face paled instantly, Her eyes, of a deep brown, widened in panic. Thomas, after a moment of surprise, broke into a radiant smile. "Dad," he exclaimed, jumping from the counter, "you came back early. We're making beans and rice and steak, and there's even pudding for dessert. Emma is teaching me to cook." Alexander looked at his son, at that enthusiasm he hadn't seen in a long time, and then at the cook, who now seemed smaller, as if trying to disappear. She quickly took off the stained apron. "Mr. Richardson, I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have let the boy in the kitchen. I know it's against the rules, but he seemed so alone and—" Alexander raised his hand, interrupting her. For a moment, everyone was silent. He could feel the fear emanating from her, the fear of losing her job because of a moment of kindness. And he also saw the expectation in his son's eyes, the fear that this small island of joy he had found would be destroyed by his always so rigid father. At that moment, something strange happened inside Alexander Richardson. As if a door long, closed opened, letting in a light he had forgotten existed. He looked at the bubbling pot, at the kitchen that seemed more alive than he had ever seen it, and then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, he pulled up a chair and sat at the table. "Continue," he said in a calm voice, though his heart was beating fast. "I want to taste what you're making." Emma's expression was one of pure shock, followed by a relief so intense that her eyes shone with contained tears. Thomas froze for a moment, as if not believing what he saw, and then let out a cry of joy that echoed throughout the mansion. "You're staying for dinner, Dad? Really?" There was so much hope in that simple question that Alexander felt a pang of shame. When had having dinner with his own son become an extraordinary event? "Yes," he replied, trying to smile. "I'm staying." Emma, still suspicious, returned to the stove and began serving the plates with trembling hands. The food was simple: white rice, beans, grilled steak with onions, and a little farofa. Nothing like the elaborate meals Alexander usually received at starred restaurants. But when he brought the first forkful to his mouth, something strange happened. The flavor hit him like a wave of memories. He remembered his mother, the simple table where they ate when he was a child, before all the wealth, before all the loneliness disguised as success. And he realized he couldn't remember the last time he had really tasted a meal. "It's good," he said, and it seemed those simple words meant much more than he could express. Thomas smiled as if he had received the best gift in the world, and Emma finally relaxed a little, though she still maintained a respectful distance. During the meal, the boy talked non-stop, telling stories from school, about friends, about drawings he made, an entire universe that Alexander barely knew. And so, on that unexpected night, something began to change in the Richardson mansion. A small crack appeared in the armor that Alexander had built around his heart. In the days that followed, a subtle transformation began to occur. Alexander started coming home earlier. At first, he used elaborate excuses for himself: a document that needed reviewing at home, a video conference he could do from his personal office. But the truth, which he wasn't ready to admit yet, was that he longed for those moments in the kitchen. Each day, he found Thomas and Emma in a new culinary adventure. One day it was homemade bread, the next a chocolate cake, then lasagna. And most impressive, his son, once so quiet and introverted, flourished like a plant finally exposed to the sun. He talked, laughed, asked questions, and even dared to tell jokes, some of them taught by Emma, Alexander suspected. As for the cook, she remained cautious, always respectful, but there was a genuine kindness in her that was impossible not to notice. She treated Thomas with a perfect mixture of affection and firmness, teaching him not just about food, but about life. And although she never crossed boundaries with Alexander, there were moments when their eyes met. When Thomas said something particularly funny, or when they tasted a new recipe together. and a silent understanding seemed to flow between them. Slowly, the mansion began to change. The oppressive silence gave way to sounds of life, laughter, conversations, even music. Emma sometimes hummed while cooking, simple songs that spoke of love and hope. Alexander found himself listening, allowing that soft voice to penetrate places long closed within him. But the mansion wasn't an island isolated from the world. It was a microcosm of power and, as such, was subject to the same dynamics, the same games of influence and prejudice of the outside world. The first person to notice the change was Martha, his secretary. For years, she had been the bridge between Alexander and the world, including his son. She was the one who organized birthday presents, bought school uniforms, knew by heart Thomas's schedules and appointments. And now, suddenly, her role seemed diminished. "You've been leaving earlier lately," she commented one day, in a neutral tone, but with a calculating gleam in her eyes. "I hope there aren't any problems." "There's no problem at all, Martha," Alexander replied firmly. "I'm just reorganizing my priorities." The phrase came out naturally, but as soon as he said it, he realized its weight. He was, in fact, reorganizing his priorities. And not everyone was pleased with this. The whispers began to circulate through the mansion. The other employees, the driver, the maids, the gardener, watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The cook, who before was just another employee, now seemed to occupy a special place. And this generated envy, resentment. "She's taking advantage of the boy to get close to the boss," the housekeeper whispered to the maid while they changed the bed sheets. "I've seen this movie before. And Mr. Richardson, so intelligent in business, so blind to these things," replied the other, shaking her head with false compassion. The rumors eventually reached the ears of Rebecca, Helen's sister, and Thomas's aunt. Since her sister's death, she had assumed an almost maternal role in her nephew's life, though her visits were more motivated by a sense of duty than genuine affection. She was an elegant, sophisticated woman, deeply aware of her social position. Tutti. A Sunday during the family lunch that happened religiously once a month, Rebecca observed with critical eyes the interaction between Alexander, Thomas, and the cook, who personally served the dishes she had prepared. "Thank you, Emma," said Alexander when she placed in front of him a mouth-watering dessert. "It's my grandmother's recipe," she replied with a shy smile. "I hope you like it." "Emma taught me how to make the cream," Thomas intervened proudly. "I stirred until my arm hurt." There was laughter, but Rebecca's look remained cold. When Emma withdrew, she leaned toward her brother-in-law and with a low but incisive voice said, "Don't you think you're giving too much freedom to this employee?" Alexander looked up from his plate, surprised by the tone. "What do you mean?" "Oh, Alexander, don't be naive." Rebecca adjusted the gold bracelet on her wrist. "This woman is clearly taking advantage of the situation, using Thomas to get close to you." Thomas, who was playing with the dessert, raised his head upon hearing his name. "Emma is my friend," he said, with the direct simplicity of children. "She teaches me cool things." "I'm sure she does, dear." Rebecca gave a fake smile to her nephew before returning to her brother-in-law. "Alexander, I need to warn you. These simple people always have a hidden interest. You're a rich man, widowed, vulnerable." "I'm not vulnerable," Alexander cut in, feeling growing irritation. "We all are when it comes to the heart," she replied, and there was something cruel in her smile. "Helen barely left and—" "It's been 4 years, Rebecca." His voice was pure ice now. Enough time for this type of woman to notice an opportunity. "Be careful. You can't let yourself be deceived." The conversation was interrupted by Thomas, who asked to leave the table, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension. When they were alone, Alexander faced his sister-in-law. "Emma is a good employee. She brought life to this house, and Thomas is happier than he's been in years." "Ah, so now you care about Thomas's happiness?" The poison in Rebecca's voice was palpable. After years of leaving him with nannies and employees, suddenly you discovered you have a son. The words hit him like a slap. It was true, and that's why it hurt so much. He didn't respond, and Rebecca interpreted his silence as a victory. "I'm just trying to protect you and Thomas," she said, softening her tone. "You should investigate. This woman's past. I bet you'd find unpleasant surprises." After Rebecca left, Alexander sat alone in the dining room for a long time. Her words had planted a seed of doubt. Was he being naive? Did Emma have, in fact, ulterior motives? He remembered her smile, her kindness with Thomas, the way her eyes sometimes reflected deep sadness, as if she carried an invisible weight. There were moments when she seemed almost broken. And yet there was a strength in her, a dignity he admired. No, he thought. Emma wasn't pretending. Her kindness was too genuine to be calculated. But Rebecca's words continued to echo in his mind in the days that followed. And no matter how much he tried to ignore them, the seed of mistrust had been planted. Life continued, its course in the Richardson mansion. Alexander continued to return home earlier. Thomas continued to flourish. And Emma continued to fill the house with aromas, flavors, and a kindness that seemed to heal old wounds. But under the surface, something had changed. Alexander began to observe Emma with more critical eyes, looking for signs of falseness, of manipulation. He found none. What he saw, instead, were small moments of vulnerability that she tried to hide. Like when she received a phone call and stepped away to speak in a low voice, her face tense. Or when she thought no one was looking, and her smile disappeared, giving way to an expression of deep sadness. One night, about 3 weeks after the dinner with Rebecca, Alexander returned home especially late. A problem with an international contract had kept him at the office until after 10. The mansion was silent, the lights dimmed. Thomas would certainly already be sleeping. Feeling strangely disappointed for having missed dinner with his son, Alexander walked toward the kitchen, hoping perhaps to find something to eat before retiring. It was then that he heard, coming from there, a soft sound, almost inaudible. Someone was crying. He approached cautiously and saw, through the half-open door, Emma sitting at the kitchen table. She was alone, with an open letter in front of her. Silent tears ran down her face as she murmured to herself, "I just want a chance to start over, away from everything I suffered." There was so much pain in those words, so much loneliness, that Alexander felt a stab in his chest. He recognized in her the same silent desperation he himself had felt after losing Helen. The same struggle to continue, to find meaning. Without thinking, he pushed the door and entered. Emma raised her head, startled, and quickly folded the letter, hiding it under a dish towel. She dried her tears with the back of her hands, trying to regain composure. "Mr. Richardson," her voice was hoarse, "I didn't hear you arrive. Do you want me to prepare something for you to eat?" The speed with which she tried to hide her pain, the way she immediately placed herself in the role of servant, caused Alexander a feeling of discomfort. As if he were invading something intimate, sacred. "No, don't worry," he said, hesitant. "I just came to get a glass of water." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Emma remained standing, tense, her eyes still red from crying. Alexander wanted to ask what afflicted her, wanted to offer help, comfort. But Rebecca's words returned to his mind like poison. These simple people always have a hidden interest. "Is everything okay?" he finally asked, his voice colder than intended. Emma hesitated as if thinking whether she could trust him. "Yes, sir, just personal problems. Nothing important." She was lying, it was obvious. The letter she had hidden with such desperation certainly contained something significant. Something she didn't want him to know. The old Alexander, the cold and calculating businessman, took control. If something was being hidden in his house, he had the right to know. "What letter is that?" he asked directly, pointing to the dish towel under which she had hidden the paper. Emma's face paled. "It's personal, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm asking what it is," he insisted, taking a step forward. Emma stepped back, her eyes now filled with fear. "Please, Mr. Richardson, it's nothing that affects my work, I swear." "How can I be sure?" The words came out harsher than he intended. "Trust is everything in this house, Emma. What are you hiding?" Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was also a gleam of indignation. "I never did anything to deserve." "This mistrust," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. "I've always treated your son with affection, always done my work with dedication. And because of that, you think you have the right to bring your problems to my house? To influence my son with your issues?" As soon as the words came out, Alexander knew he had gone too far. He saw in Emma's face the impact of his words, as if he had slapped her. "I understand," she said, after a moment of heavy silence. "You're right, this is your house, and I'm just an employee. I forgot my place." There was a painful dignity in the way she straightened up, drying her tears. "Tomorrow, I'll submit my resignation letter. I don't want to bring problems to your family." Alexander felt a sudden tightness in his chest. This wasn't what he wanted. He didn't want her to leave, didn't want to lose that light that had entered his house. But pride, mistrust, and years of emotional distance prevented him from saying this. "Maybe it's for the best," he heard himself say, as if it were someone else speaking. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, replaying the scene in the kitchen, feeling worse and worse. What had he done? Why had he let Rebecca's insinuations affect him so much? He had known Emma for weeks, seen the genuine way she treated Thomas, how she had transformed the house's atmosphere, and he had thrown it all away because of unfounded suspicion. The next morning he went down for coffee expecting to find her, hoping to somehow fix the mistake of the previous night. But the kitchen was different. There was fresh coffee, bread, and fruit on the table, but there wasn't the cinnamon smell that usually permeated the environment when Emma was present. Her place, one of the kitchen assistants was serving Thomas, who seemed sadly diminished in his chair. "Where is Emma?" the boy asked, looking at his father with accusing eyes. Alexander felt a knot in his throat. She had to leave, son." "Why?" The question was simple, direct, devastating. "Sometimes people need to follow other paths," he replied, knowing how empty that explanation sounded. "She didn't even say goodbye to me," Thomas said, his voice small, hurt. "You sent her away, didn't you?" The accusation hit Alexander like a punch. He saw in his son's eyes not just sadness, but disappointment, as if Thomas somehow had expected more from him. "It wasn't exactly like that, son," he tried to explain. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated," Thomas replied, pushing his plate away. "You didn't like seeing us happy." With those words, the boy slid from his chair and left the kitchen, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of his decision. The days that followed were a return to the old silence. Thomas returned to being the quiet and withdrawn child from before. Dinners returned to being silent, formal events. The house, which for a brief period had known warmth and life, plunged again into a cold and sterile atmosphere. Alexander tried to compensate, arriving home earlier, trying to talk with his son. But Thomas had erected a wall between them, responding only with monosyllables, avoiding his father's gaze. The hurt was there, palpable, and Alexander didn't know how to cross it. A week after Emma's departure, Alexander was in his home office, trying unsuccessfully to concentrate on financial reports when one of the maids knocked timidly at the door. "Mr. Richardson, excuse me for bothering you," said the maid, hesitant. We were cleaning the service room that belonged to Emma and found this. She extended a simple envelope without address or identification. Alexander took it, feeling a weight disproportionate to that small piece of paper. Thank you, Margaret. You can leave it with me. When he was alone, Alexander stared at the envelope for a long time, as if fearing its contents. Finally, he took a deep breath and opened it. Inside was the letter he had seen Emma hiding that fatal night. The letter that he, in his arrogance and mistrust, had assumed was some kind of threat, some dark secret. With his heart racing, he began to read. It wasn't a letter addressed to someone, but a kind of diary of unburdening. Emma wrote to herself as a way of exorcising inner demons. Today marks 5 years since I lost my son. 5 years since Lorenzo was taken by the fever. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I heard him cry. I still feel his weight in my arms, that warmth. How can memory be so cruel and so sweet at the same time? Michael continues to persecute me. He says it was my fault, that if I hadn't left to work, I would have noticed the fever in time. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am to blame. But I can't live anymore in this hell of guilt and recrimination. I found a new job in a big house with a child. The boy reminds me so much of Lorenzo. He has the same curiosity, the same way of tilting his head when he's thinking. At first it hurt to look at him, but now it's like a balm. I take care of him as I would have liked to care for my son, with all the love that remained trapped inside me. His father is a sad man, lost in his own pain. I recognize the look. It's the same one I see in the mirror every day. Maybe that's why I feel so comfortable in that house. We are all survivors trying to pretend we still know how to live. I just want a chance to start over, away from everything. I suffered. Away from Michael, away from the memories, away from the guilt. I want to believe I can still build something good, still find peace. I want to believe Lorenzo would be proud of his mother, seeing that I didn't give up, that I keep trying one day at a time. That's what I tell myself every morning. One day at a time. When he finished reading, Alexander realized his face was wet with tears. Emma's words had hit him at his core, her pain, so similar to his own. The struggle to continue, to find meaning after a devastating loss. The way she had found comfort in caring for Thomas, just as he himself, without realizing, had found comfort in her presence, and he had driven her away. Out of pride, out of fear, for having listened to Rebecca's petty insinuations instead of trusting his own instinct. On an impulse, Alexander picked up the phone and called his company's human resources department. "I need Emma Almeida's address," he said without preamble. "It's urgent." Half an hour later, he was driving his own car, something he rarely did, through the city streets, following the GPS directions. The address led him to a simple neighborhood of small and modest houses. He parked in front of the indicated number, a corner house with recently painted light yellow walls and a small, well-tended garden in front. For a moment, he hesitated. What would he say to her? How would he explain his behavior? How would he ask forgiveness for such a deep injustice? But before he could decide, the house door opened and Emma appeared. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a blue blouse, very different from the uniforms she wore at the mansion. She carried a basket with what seemed to be freshly baked bread, probably to sell. Upon seeing him standing by the car, she froze, her face a mask of surprise and confusion. Alexander walked toward her, feeling inexplicably nervous. He, who negotiated millions without blinking, who faced administrative boards with calculated coldness, now could barely find words. "Emma," he said finally, when he got close enough not to need to raise his voice. I came to apologize." She stared at him, suspicious, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of emotions, surprise, hurt, a trace of hope quickly suppressed. "You Didn't need to go to the trouble, Mr. Richardson, she replied, her voice controlled. I already understood my place. No. Alexander took another step forward, reducing the distance between them. You didn't understand. I'm the one who didn't understand. I read your letter, Emma. Her face paled. You what? It was left in your room. The maid found it and gave it to me, he explained quickly. I shouldn't have read it, but I'm glad I did. It made me see how wrong I was. Emma lowered her eyes, the breadbasket pressed against her chest like a shield. That wasn't for anyone to read, she said, her voice small. Those are personal, private things. I know, and I'm sorry for that too. But Emma, he hesitated, searching for the right words. I lost my wife. You lost your son. We both know pain, loneliness. And when you entered our lives, you brought something I didn't even know was missing. Warmth. Life. Please, come back. Emma raised her eyes, now bright with contained tears. Come back for what, Mr. Richardson? To be treated with suspicion? To feel like an intruder? No, he shook his head, feeling his own voice fail. Come back to help us be a family again. Come back because Thomas needs you. Because He took a deep breath. Because I need you too. It was at that moment that the house door opened again and Thomas emerged, his face lighting up upon seeing. Who was there? Emma! Dad! He exclaimed, running toward them. Alexander turned, surprised. Thomas? What are you doing here? The boy stopped in front of them, breathless, his eyes shining with excitement. I ran away, he admitted, without any trace of remorse. I took a taxi with money from my piggy bank. I needed to find Emma. I needed to tell her we miss her. We miss her? Alexander asked, an involuntary smile forming on his lips. Yes. Thomas crossed his arms, determined. You miss her too, Dad. You just didn't want to admit it. The house became sad again without her. Emma looked at the boy with a mixture of tenderness and concern. Thomas, you shouldn't have run away. Your father must be worried. I didn't really run away, the boy corrected, with the impeccable logic of children. I left a note saying where I was going. And now you're here too, Dad, so there's no problem. Alexander couldn't help but laugh. His son, only 8 years old, had had the courage he himself had almost not found. The courage to follow his heart, to seek what he needed. So, Thomas looked from one to the other, expectant. Is Emma coming home with us? Emma hesitated, looking at Alexander. There was a silent question in her eyes, a vulnerability he had never noticed before. I don't know, Thomas, she said softly. It's an important decision, not something that's resolved just like that, suddenly. Why not? The boy questioned, with typical childhood impatience. You like us, we like you. It's simple. Alexander took a step forward, further reducing the distance between him and Emma. Gently, he took the breadbasket from her hands and placed it on the ground. Then, with a gentleness that surprised even himself, he took her hands in his. Emma, he said, his voice firm now. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I have a lot to learn about being a father, about being human again. But I promise I'll never doubt you again. I promise we'll make that house a real home. Please, give us a second chance. Her eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, she remained silent, as if fighting an inner battle. Then, slowly, she squeezed his hands back. All right, she said finally, her voice soft. Let's try. Thomas let out a cry of joy and threw himself against both of them, hugging them around the waist. Alexander, in an instinctive movement, put one arm around his son and the other around Emma, pulling them closer. And so they stayed, the three of them, forming an imperfect but genuine circle, while the morning sun bathed them with golden and promising light. The months that followed were of transformation for the Richardson mansion. What before was just a luxurious house became a home. Thomas's laughter echoed through the corridors. The soft music that Emma liked to listen to while cooking became the soundtrack of the place. And Alexander, slowly, relearned to live in the present, not just in the future of his contracts and business. Not everything was easy, of course. Rebecca, upon discovering that Emma had returned, and in an even closer position to the family, was furious. She even threatened to cut relations with her brother-in-law, accusing him of dishonoring Helen's memory. But Alexander, for the first time in many years, didn't let himself be intimidated by social expectations or appearances. Helen would have loved Emma, he said simply to his sister-in-law. She always said this house needed more life. Now it has it. The mansion staff also needed time to adjust to the new dynamic. Some, like Martha, never completely accepted it. Others, noticing the positive change in the boss and the boy, ended up embracing the new reality. For Emma, it was a journey of healing. Being able to care for Thomas, create with him, teach and learn, helped her process the grief for the son she had lost. Not that the pain had disappeared. Some pains never completely disappear, but there was now room for joy, for love. As for Alexander, the transformation was profound. He continued to be a successful businessman, but was no longer a slave to work. He learned to delegate more, to trust his team, to set boundaries. Every day he returned home in time to have dinner with Thomas and Emma, and every night, before sleeping, he went to his son's room to read a story, a ritual that, according to Emma, was as important for the father as for the son. The relationship between Alexander and Emma evolved naturally, without haste. At first, there was mutual care, almost a shyness. Both carried deep scars, both feared opening themselves to new wounds. But daily coexistence, complicity in caring for Thomas, small moments of shared joy, wove between them a connection that couldn't be denied. On a summer night, about a year after Emma's return, the three were in the mansion's garden. Thomas had fallen asleep on a lounge chair after a day of playing in the pool. Alexander and Emma were sitting side by side, watching the stars that were beginning to dot the dark sky. "Have you ever stopped to think?" Emma broke the silence, her voice soft. "In the warm night, how strange life is, how the most painful things sometimes take us to the most beautiful places." Alexander looked at her, at the delicate profile outlined against the night sky, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost left him breathless. "I think about it every day," he replied honestly. "If Helen hadn't left, I would never have met you. And at the same time, I feel guilty for finding happiness after losing her." Emma turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the first stars. "I understand. I feel the same about Lorenzo. Like being happy would be a betrayal of his memory." She paused, thoughtful. "But I think our loved ones wouldn't want that for us. They wouldn't want us trapped in pain forever." "No, they wouldn't," Alexander agreed, extending his hand to touch hers. "Helen always said life is for the living, that we should honor the dead by living fully." Emma's fingers intertwined with his, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning. "Do you know what Thomas told me the other day?" She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "He said maybe Lorenzo and Helen are together somewhere, taking care of us." Alexander felt a knot in his throat. "That would be a beautiful story," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Yes, it would be." Emma gently squeezed his hand. "And I think they'd be happy to see we found each other, that we're not alone anymore." Alexander looked at his sleeping son, at that small life that now flourished under their care, and then at Emma, who had brought light back to both of them. And he knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of his soul, that they were on the right path. "We're not alone anymore," he repeated, the words a promise. That night, under the starry sky, with Thomas sleeping peacefully a few meters away, Alexander and Emma sealed their mutual understanding with a kiss, soft, cautious, but full of promise. A kiss that spoke of an honored past, a valued present, and a shared future. 3 years later, the Richardson mansion was unrecognizable. Not in its physical structure, it continued to be the same imposing house as before, but in its essence, in its energy. There were fresh flowers in all rooms, Thomas's drawings decorating the walls, photographs of happy moments lovingly framed. On Sunday mornings, an extended breakfast in the garden became tradition. Alexander Thomas, now 11 years old and full of opinions, and Emma gathered around a table full of homemade delicacies. Sometimes they invited friends, neighbors, Thomas's schoolmates. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had become a center of coexistence and affection. On this particular Sunday, there was something special in the air. Thomas was more agitated than normal, could barely sit still, and exchanged knowing looks with Emma constantly. "What are you two up to?" Alexander asked, feigning suspicion, but with a smile on his lips. "Nothing," they both responded in unison, which only increased the suspicion. Right. Alexander shook his head, amused. "Last time I saw that face, I ended up with a dog in the garage." "Max is an excellent guard dog," Thomas defended, referring to the mixed breed they had adopted the previous year, after much insistence from the boy. "Of course, if his job is to lick intruders to death," Alexander joked. They laughed, and then Emma exchanged another look with Thomas before getting up. "I have something for you both," she said, with a mixture of nervousness and joy. "I hope you like it." She went into the house and returned moments later with a rectangular package, wrapped in simple paper. She handed it to Alexander, but indicated with a gesture that it was for both, him and Thomas. "What is this?" Alexander asked, genuinely surprised. "It's nobody's birthday." "Sometimes we don't need special dates to celebrate," Emma replied, sitting back down. "Open it." Thomas approached his father, anxious to see the package's contents. Together, they unwrapped the gift. It was a book. No, an album. On the cover, a photo of the three together, smiling at the camera with the words, "Our family," in golden letters. "Emma," Alexander murmured, his voice suddenly choked. "Open it," she encouraged, her eyes shining with expectation. As they leafed through the album, they found a collection of photographs that told their story over the past years. There were photos from their first Christmas together, Thomas's birthday, beach vacations, simple moments from daily life, Emma and Thomas cooking, Alexander teaching his son to swim, the three watching a movie on the sofa. Each photo was accompanied by a handwritten caption in Emma's delicate handwriting. But it was on the last page that the gift's true meaning was revealed. There was an envelope there, and inside it, an official document, an adoption request. Emma wanted to legally adopt Thomas, officially become his mother. I thought a lot about this," she said, her voice trembling. "Thomas is already my son in my heart. He has been since the first day. But I'd like it to be official. Of course, only if you both want it too." Thomas was the first to react. With tears in his eyes, he threw himself into Emma's arms. "I want it. I want it. You're already my mom, Emma. You have been for a long time." Emma hugged him tightly, unable to contain her own tears. Then she looked at Alexander, a silent question in her eyes. Alexander was paralyzed, too moved to react immediately. Emma's gesture meant so much. It was the final recognition that they had, in fact, formed a new family. A family built not on blood or social conventions, but on love, understanding, mutual acceptance. "Emma," he said finally, his voice hoarse, with emotion. "Are you sure? Adoption is a lifelong commitment." She smiled through her tears. "I'm more sure of this than anything else in my life," she replied simply. Alexander looked at his son, now nestled in Emma's arms, and felt his heart overflow. How had they gotten here? How, from the darkness and loneliness that surrounded them years ago, Had they found this oasis of happiness? "In that case," he said, getting up to join the embrace, "I think I have a question to ask." Emma looked at him, confused, as he knelt before her. "Alexander." From his pocket, he took out a small blue velvet box. He hadn't planned to do this today. The ring had been stored for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. But now he realized there couldn't be a better occasion. "Emma Almeida," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate white gold ring with a small sapphire. "You not only brought light back to our lives, but taught us to live again, to love again. You showed me that happiness isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share. Will you marry me?" An astonished silence followed, broken by Thomas's enthusiastic shout, "Say yes, Emma! Say yes!" Emma brought her hands to her face, tears now flowing freely. "Yes," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, and then the three were hugging, laughing, and crying at the same time, forming that imperfect but genuine circle that had become their refuge, their safe harbor, their home. The wedding ceremony was simple and intimate, held in the mansion's garden on a golden autumn afternoon. Only close friends and some family members were invited, including Rebecca, who, over time, had learned to accept, if not completely approve, her brother-in-law's new family configuration. Thomas, elegant in his first suit, was his father's best man. His eyes shone with pride and happiness as he watched Emma walking toward them, beautiful in an ivory lace dress, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. During the vows, there were no elaborate speeches or grandiose promises. Alexander and Emma spoke of gratitude, of second chances, of finding light in darkness. They spoke of building a future together, respecting the past that had shaped them, honoring the absences they still felt, but celebrating the life they now shared. After the ceremony, while guests conversed animatedly under string lights hung in the trees, Alexander found a moment of quiet. He observed his new family from afar. Emma, now his wife, talking with friends, her musical laughter echoing in the night air. Thomas, running with other children through the garden, his energy contagious, his joy pure and true. It was then that he felt a presence beside him. It was an elderly lady, Helen's aunt, who had come from far away for the ceremony. She would be happy, you know, the lady said, following Alexander's gaze. "Helen always wanted you to find peace." Alexander felt a knot in his throat. "Sometimes I feel guilty," he admitted in a low voice. "Like I'm betraying her memory." The lady smiled, gently. "Love isn't a pie, Alexander. It doesn't have limited slices. Loving Emma doesn't diminish what you felt for Helen. It just shows your heart is bigger than you thought." Before he could respond, Alexander felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Thomas, breathless from running. "Dad, Emma is looking for you. It's time for the cake." "I'm coming, son," he smiled, messing up the boy's hair. As he walked toward his wife, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them there. A journey that began with pain and loneliness, but through unexpected encounters and brave choices, had led them to a place of love and completeness. The Richardson mansion, once so cold and silent, now overflowed with life. And Alexander, the man who once believed success was measured in contracts and bank numbers, now knew the truth. Real wealth was in the bonds we create, the lives we touch, the love we give and receive. When he reached Emma's side and she intertwined, her fingers with his, Alexander knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of his soul, that he had finally found the true meaning of home. It wasn't a place, but a feeling. The feeling of belonging, of being loved, of being complete. And in that perfect moment, under the stars that began to dot the evening sky, Alexander Richardson made a silent promise to value each day, each moment, each heartbeat of this new life they had built together. Because true happiness wasn't in what he accumulated, but in what he shared. Not in what he possessed, but in what he cultivated with love and care. Not in what he conquered, but in what he nurtured. Thomas joined them, forming once again that imperfect but genuine circle. And together, as the family they had become, they cut the wedding cake. Not just celebrating Alexander and Emma's union, but honoring the journey that had brought them there. A journey of pain and healing, of losses and discoveries, of shadows and light. A journey called life. If the stories that teach us to start over touched your soul, share them. There's always someone needing to hear that after the storm, the sun can shine again.